I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Good evening, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together Rebecca and I are going to craft another amazing episode of For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families and your co-workers, and the fish in the sea and the little worms the fish eat, and the little bacteria and algae that the worms eat, and the viruses that feed on those algae, and everyone and everything. Because, like it or not, all of us are wrapped up together on this beautiful planet called Earth. And we have a really good show for you today, another rockin' episode of For a Green Future. First, we're going to just chat for a little while, another 10 minutes or so here. And then we have an interview with an amazing woman called Rabe. And she is with an organization called Don't Waste New York. And we reported last week about how the Governor Hochul in New York has decreed through executive order that there will be more nukes in New York, and she's organizing the resistance to that. Then we will hear from our patrons and sponsors, and then Rebecca. It'll be your turn at the mic, and what will we be discussing today?
I will be discussing the brackish biogeochemical Baltic Sea cycles.
Baltic Sea cycles. All right. Sounds fun. Ecologically speaking.
Yeah.
And then after that, there will be ecological news. And we've got some really good news and some really bad news and some really in-between news. But all of it important for the planet in terms of being ecological. And that really, that should be at the top of every news story, because the stuff that affects the environment affects us humans, and everything us humans do is based on having an environment that supports us. And so ecological news, I think, is the most important news, but we'll talk more about that later. In the meantime, we are recording this on July 6th, and I hope everyone had a good July 4th weekend. I actually went back to my home state of Western New York, and there we went to a family reunion, and it was a very nice reunion. It went well. Everybody got along, but I do have this one cousin by marriage who has been. Let me use the correct verb form here. Has been an all-out supporter of President Trump and the whole everything he's been doing, but we've stayed in touch on Facebook. If she puts anything too terrible, I just put the facts out and challenge it or whatever. But so we've gone back and forth on Facebook a little bit. So it's always a little touchy when you meet somebody in person that you've had Facebook disagreements with. But this time, what she did when she came up she said, well, we all make mistakes sometimes. we're all wrong sometimes. Everybody's wrong sometimes. And it was, to me, it was this tacit admission that she's kind of admitting she was wrong about supporting this guy and supporting Trump and his policies. And I think she's not alone, because Western New York used to have, hundreds and hundreds of pro-Trump signs. And I saw maybe one or two on this trip. I think what's happening is a lot of people have been shocked by some of the stuff he's done. And specifically this past week, the whole thing going out in the swamps of Florida to talk about this, they're calling the alligator Alcatraz, the prison, well, quote unquote prison. It's got barbed wire, but it doesn't have bars. It's just tents in the middle of the swamp with all the mosquitoes and stuff. And Trump's gleefully talking about immigrants having to run, trying not to get eaten by alligators and boa constrictors. I think for a lot of people that might finally be that final straw, because that's just pure cruelty, and not even, it's not something that you can just sort of brush off and say, oh, he's okay, but he's just kidding. No, he's literally talking about people dying and being happy about it. But this admission of when my friend or my family member there was saying, we all make mistakes, we're all wrong sometimes, that it was great progress for her, but it's not really true, in that there's science, okay? And sometimes science is right. Sometimes things can be proven scientifically. That's what the whole point of the scientific method is. And getting things, once you've got enough evidence, scientific evidence, you can actually make conclusions. You can actually say, okay, this is true and that is not true. And so that's the whole point of science. That's the difference between science and politics. And global warming, and if you look at everything in terms of ecological wisdom, then a lot of things kind of fall into place. You can kind of make conclusions where people who don't have a grounding in ecological science just sort of flounder around and guess. But looking at the whole alligator Alcatraz thing from an ecological perspective, it's insane to wreck the Everglades, to put a camp like this out in the middle of it. But the environmental ramifications of this prison in the middle of the Florida Everglades go kind of deep. So one of the things that isn't being reported widely, but is very true, is that is also in the middle of areas where Native Americans, the Seminoles and the McCuskey tribe, still hunt and fish and have their villages, have settlements that live off the land in the Everglades. And they plunked this right down in the middle of it. And one thing I was surprised to learn doing my research for the show today is that there's actually a Seminole village 100 yards away from this prison.
Wow.
1 football field away. And so, of course, what's going to happen if people escape from the prison? They're going to try to go to the tribe's village, right? That's right there. But part of what this is, part of have the president talk about people getting eaten by alligators and boa constrictors, is he's trying to instill this fear of nature. That historically, it was a big thing back in the 50s. The plots of a lot of stories and movies and whatever, it was actually formally written down when I took English courses. It was called Man versus Nature.
And Beowulf, going all the way back to Beowulf.
Right. And, it's a very European idea.
It's a very Northern European idea.
That people, that nature is this horrible, evil force that all it wants to do is eat you. and you have to battle it with everything you've got.
Well, when you live in Norway, where there's like 2 days of summer all year, your outlook can get a little dark. Okay.
Well, okay, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. We're just describing. We're not judging. But
Was it Dave Beery said that ski jumping was invented by the Swedish as a symptom of mental illness?
well, could be. I don't know. It is kind of cool though to do it. But
yeah, I bet it is.
anyway,
I mean, unless you break lots of bones.
well, true. Agony of defeat there.
Yes.
But so I want to contrast that picture that Trump created of the Everglades. I want to contrast that with a statement by Lewis Johnson, who's with the Oklahoma Seminole tribe, who came out. The Seminoles and the Miccosukee tribes both came out against this prison, and Lewis Johnson said, "These lands are not empty stretches of wilderness, nor are they merely backdrops to policy decisions. They are living, breathing homelands, deeply tied to the cultural, spiritual, and historical identity of the Miccosukee and Florida Seminole tribes." And so that is actually a much healthier and a much more ecologically balanced view of what's happening there. That, the Everglades are not just this horrible, malicious place where animals are just waiting to eat you.
It's a horrible, malicious place where you're minding your own business, being an alligator, and suddenly, like, your whole world is destroyed.
From the environment, from the alligator perspective.
Yes.
Yes, okay. No, it gets horrible and vicious when people are polluting it. And there's going to be, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has gone on record saying there will be zero environmental impact, even though there has been no environmental impact studies because they declared an emergency. And there's going to be lights, artificial lights all over this thing.
Was it going to hover like a few inches over the swamp so there's no impact? How's that going to work?
I have no idea. But, they
have some new kind of technology there?
They have toilets. There's going to be sewage generated by these thousands of people. And this is actually panther habitat. So this is something that's, an endangered species lives right there. So it's not, there cannot be zero impact, all right? Anyone with even the slightest bit of ecological wisdom understands
I heard
nothing.
they're going after the boa constrictors, too. The panthers? Is that?
The panthers are
something
learning
like
to eat them?
Yeah.
Well, I hope so. Yeah.
Fighting the invasive species is...
Something needs to start eating those invasive boa constrictors. Anyway, the whole thing is built on lies, essentially. And, once you start lying and once you start doing anti-environmental stuff, the corruption, the political corruption, just comes naturally very quickly afterwards. And it turns out that all these places are being built by contractors that donated millions of dollars to Ron DeSantis and Trump and other Republican candidates.
Funky coinkadink.
Yeah, there's a company there's a fellow named Carlos Duarte, a billionaire, who owns something called the CDR companies, and they're the ones that are getting all the money for putting up these flimsy places that get flooded with the slightest rain. And so we could say, it's the certainty of science that we could see there will be environmental impact, and we can't ignore what's going to happen there to the endangered species and to the native people who live literally right next door to this. There's 3 actual settlements within a very small radius of this new prison. And so we can also say with certainty that things are happening that are basically our society is being wiped out, kind of like one city at a time or one region at a time by these natural disasters. And we can say with scientific certainty now, we could do the math and say, okay, this storm was this much worse because of global warming. And so that's kind of a perspective to have on what happened down in Texas, where they had that river that went up.
Guadalupe.
Guadalupe, where the river rose 23 feet in a matter of hours.
Wiped out a whole summer camp full of kids and more.
Yeah. And, that we can say, again, with scientific certainty, that was largely a result of global warming, that the severity of that. I mean,
If I was those Seminoles, I might mention to the escaping prisoners how they can get out of there without getting eaten by alligators too. I'm guessing they know.
I think they do know because they live in that swamp.
Yes.
They hunt in that swamp. They gather their food from that swamp. And the swamp, nature is not this evil thing that's going to eat you. But, there are certain politicians that will, and we'll say evil politicians, if you're somebody who's an immigrant, who would be perfectly happy to ship you off to a third country where you will be killed. And so,
didn't we? Okay, we tried that with slaves, and a lot of them, in fact, escaped and went to live with the Native Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened.
So, all right. Anyway, another thing that we know with scientific certainty is that if you put radioactive stuff into the environment, it's going to cause cancer and mutations and deaths. And so it's kind of insane that the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, just signed an executive order ordering New York State to build another nuclear power plant. And so we talked to Ann Rabe about that. And so let's get her perspective.
Hello and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and who you're with?
I'm Ann Rabe, and I'm with Don't Waste New York, a statewide organization.
Okay, Ann. Well, happy to have you on the show. Unfortunately, we were kind of unhappy to hear Kathy Hochul last week make this grand announcement that she wants New York State to go nuclear again. What was your reaction when you heard this?
Well, she actually announced this last September at a invitation-only state summit in Syracuse, New York. And since then, she's been aggressively and recklessly pursuing nuclear on 4 different administrative tracks. So this was her latest step. And what she did last week is she issued an executive order telling our New York Power Authority that they must construct a new nuclear power plant. Now, whether it's a conventional reactor or a small modular reactor, we don't know yet, but obviously we're appalled, and there's a huge statewide coalition opposing this misguided effort.
Well, that's great. Well, I guess the order says it has to be at least 1 gigawatt, so that's not exactly a small modular reactor, is it?
True, but it could be that they have in mind to do a couple. I mean, that was quoted as saying 2 months ago that she wants new industry like computer chip facilities and data centers, et cetera, to come to New York and bring along their own SMR, their own small modular reactor for their energy needs.
Well, we were really disappointed to hear this because it was last year, right, that the governor actually signed off on stopping Holtec from dumping tritium contaminated water into the Hudson River. And it sort of seemed like she understood the dangers and the pollution caused by nuclear. And then all of a sudden she comes out pro-nuclear. Do we have any idea what happened, how this transformation took place?
We do from multiple government sources. And we also have some alarming information about an internal financial assessment report, which was done on advanced nuclear by our New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA. So what happened from our sources and government agencies is apparently last summer, three entities contacted Governor Hochul and aggressively pushed nuclear. Federal Department of Energy under President Biden, saying, we need more energy because of AI demands, and so nuclear is the only alternative, and we want New York State to be one of the lead states on this. So they heavily pushed and talked about a new grant program, which New York State is now in the process of applying for. Secondly, the Wall Street banks, the top 4 Wall Street banks, pressured the governor because in the next 10 years they have huge AI energy demands, and they think nuclear is the only alternative. And then thirdly, Micron, which is building a massive computer chip factory in Syracuse, New York, with huge energy demands. They actually threatened the governor, apparently. They gave an ultimatum. We'll build a natural gas plant or we'll build nuclear.
Wow.
And yeah. And so she required her energy authority, research authority, to do a financial assessment. And the financial assessment report, we've talked to sources who had a hand in writing this report. And basically, they looked at New York State facilitating in public-private partnerships, very vague on that, but facilitating the creation of up to 10 SMRs, small modular reactors, at about $8 billion each. So about $80 billion. And they looked at the scenarios of New York State covering 20 to 50% of the costs of that $80 billion. And they basically found, they looked at worst, middle, and best case scenarios. Findings were astronomical costs to ratepayers and taxpayers, enormous liability to the state, and that NYSERDA recommended New York State not pursue nuclear, fiscally irresponsible, heavy burden on ratepayers and taxpayers. Doreen Harris, who's the president of NYSERDA, took this to the governor last year, and she agreed with her staff's recommendations. And the governor turned around and said, nope, we're doing it. Find the money. So they started with the summit, a blueprint and now a master plan process. And what's interesting, Joe, is that NYSERDA started a 2-year master plan process to look at economic development, et cetera, in relation to advanced nuclear technologies, with the assumption that it would definitely happen. So there was no economic or environmental review done publicly for the legislators, for the public who's concerned to know about what's going on with this advanced nuclear technology. Is it going to be an assessment before we automatically decide to do it? Nothing like that happened. It's a 2-year process. And then, as you noted, last week, she superseded her 2-year process by NYSERDA and ordered the New York Public Authority to build a reactor. So she's reckless and fiscally irresponsible. And we have a couple campaigns that we're working on to push back. We're not going to let New York State be the first state to build new nuclear.
Well, that's good. That's admirable, because the last state to build new nuclear, Georgia with the Vogtle plants, that didn't go so well for the ratepayers, right?
Right.
Yeah, this is all very alarming, and it's interesting that she's pushing nuclear so hard when figures just came out from the International Energy Agency that investment in nuclear is minuscule globally compared to investments in wind and solar and storage, because the return on investment is horrible.
I would love to get a copy of that report.
Okay. So she's just sort of the latest governor to fall. I mean, the first one was Newsom, right? And then in California, who stopped the shutdown of the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, and then in Michigan, the governor there reversed the closure of a nuclear power plant and is spending billions of state dollars and federal dollars to try to reopen the Palisades plant, a closed nuclear plant. That's Governor Whitmer. What is it? You think it's just the money, just the guys with the big pockets that are pushing this?
I think that they've been planning this for years, and they've built it into such a huge false dream that the governor, our Governor Hochul, has totally drank the Kool-Aid. She believes this is really going to create jobs. She believes that this is really going to save our implementation of our 2019 Climate Act, where we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and transition to renewable energy 2030, 2040, 2050 goals. We're about 6 years behind. And her concern, from what we understand, her concern is that by 2040, solar and wind is not going to be able to deal with the energy demand that's coming from AI, for instance. And so nuclear is, quote unquote, the only option. I think she truly believes this fallacy. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hiring like RMR, Synapse Energy Economics. We're going to hire an economic energy firm to do a renewable energy plan of action all the way to 2050, showing how New York State with solar, wind, battery storage, geothermal heat pumps can and will meet our Climate Act goals without nuclear.
And you're probably familiar with the work of Mark Jacobson too, then, who's done that same study for all 50 states, but on a,
Yes. In fact, we had a legislative briefing. We had a legislative briefing in January, and he spoke. And we had about 70 legislators and their staff attend this Zoom legislative briefing.
Well, that's great. So you, like us, over the past week, you had suffered from the heat wave. And, around here, we were told to start reducing electricity use because it was too much demand, the heat on the air conditioning and on the grid. But Texas, which has gone, solar in a big way, actually had excess power during that whole heat wave. So, and their electricity prices, while ours were going through the roof from peak demand, theirs were actually negative. That they were actually paying people to take the electricity. So, so it seems like the governor is just plain wrong on this.
She is. And a second campaign demand is going to be to our state legislature that there be a moratorium law until a full economic and environmental assessment shows, number one, that nuclear is fiscally viable for ratepayers and taxpayers. And we all know that that's not true without government welfare. And number two, an environmental assessment. New York State has 7 reactors, and we have never seen the results testing off site, fish, wildlife, strontium 90 in milk. We have never seen those test results that are done annually by our state agencies.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of what's going on here, you and I, I'm making an assumption here, but you and I are kind of old enough to remember sort of when the environmental movement really got going back in the 70s, and people for the first time kind of realized just what happens when things like radioactive isotopes get out into the environment and they get dispersed and then they get concentrated in living organisms and stuff. And it's sort of, I think that was kind of that realization was sort of the core of the anti-nuclear movement, where we realized, hey, every time we create a radioactive isotope, we're essentially dooming someone or something living in the future. Why do you think politicians like Kathy Hochul seem to have forgotten this?
They've been allowed to. And, she comes from Hamburg, south of Love Canal. She claims that she's an environmentalist. She's anything but. And so basically we have to remind her. I want to mention, because this is the only place in the world we know of that in 1959, before Indian Point, which is 34 miles north of Manhattan, before one of the 3 Indian Point nuclear reactors was built, our Department of Health had the presence of mind to do a 20-mile eco-monitoring baseline study. They tested the thyroid of rabbits. They tested 60 dairy farms, cow's milk, fish, wildlife, air, water, soil. And we have, accessed that in the Journal of Public Health, very detailed baseline study. We've asked over 300 groups and policymakers, local government officials who live in the Hudson Valley near the Indian Point 3 closed reactors, have asked for the state to do another study to compare from 61 years ago, whether there was any increase in the radionuclides, because, 24/7, 3 reactors running, putting out the radioactive emissions into the air, into the water, and into the soil. There's underground tritium contamination at the reactors. So we're pushing for that because we owe it. We owe it to future generations. The first generation of nuclear power plants, there's really been no off-site in-depth studies in terms of off-site pollution. And here we have a baseline study to compare it to. So that's one thing. The other thing is that our state, since 1962, at the 3 reactor complexes in our state, the Department of Health has been testing the deer, the fish, wildlife, and the milk supply. And we want those results made public, and we want an analysis done of that 60 years worth of annual data to see, again, if there's been an increase in the environment. Is there off-site pollution that we should be addressing?
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like there probably is. It's kind of interesting that information isn't public already.
Well, it used to be public, and then under Republican Governor George Pataki, about 10 years ago, it was stopped being public. So we have some of the records, but yeah, I think you're right. I mean, everyone knows if you live next to a chemical plant, a manufacturing facility that's using a lot of toxic or radioactive chemicals, there's a certain amount of off-site pollution comes out of the stack emissions and it lands on the ground. And if there's illegal dumping, as was suspected in Indian Point reactors, for instance, that's another source that they call pathway of exposure. So we have a responsibility to future generations and the current generations of communities living next to these next to these reactors. We have a responsibility to require our government to do comprehensive off-site testing. And if there's any pollution, to clean it up. And that's one last thing, Joe, I wanted to mention. In our state, we're what they call an agreement state with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So our environmental and health agencies implement many aspects of the NRC's rules and regulations. And what's horrific is that our cleanup standards for soil, for radioactively contaminated soil, are based on a 1 in 500 people getting cancer.
Wow.
And we also in New York State, because we're the first in many ways environmentally with our laws, in 2003, I worked with a whole big team of organizations, and we passed our state Superfund and Brownfield cleanup program statutes, which have the most health protective soil cleanup standards for toxic chemicals based on 1 in a million cancer risk. Only 1 in a million people will get cancer with the residual contamination left at these cleaned up sites, versus the NRC would have Indian Point reactor, for instance, when it's quote unquote cleaned up, have 1 in 500 people would contract cancer if they lived on that property. It's obscene. And we're going to change that. We're going to pass a law that requires nuclear to no longer be a privileged pollutant, but to have the same cleanup standards for radioactive waste contamination as we have for toxic contamination.
All right. So if people want to help you in this endeavor, where could they find out what you're doing and how they can help?
Well, they can contact me by email. My name, ANNERABE @msn.com, or contact me by cell 518-560-1849. We would greatly appreciate any information, any support, any donations. We're just starting out on this massive campaign. We're going to win, but we use all the help we can get.
Okay. And that was our interview with Ann Rabe. It's pretty interesting, some very intense inside information there. What did you think? Give us a call, 866-909-1007, 866-909-1007. They're, Kathy Hochul, they're talking about New York, but there's governors all over the country. They're talking about it. And Ohio could be in the crosshairs of the nuclear industry. I mean, they want nukes everywhere. What would you think if they were to put a nuclear plant right next to your house? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? And that was Anne, ANNE, Rabe, RABE @msn.com. Okay, now it's time to hear from our wonderful patrons and advertisers. For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. Imagine a place where nature meets adventure, where you can climb, paddle, fish, and explore. That place, it's right here in Wood County. The Wood County Park District is here to protect, preserve, and inspire. We conserve natural and cultural treasures so you can enjoy the outdoors like never before. by maintaining green spaces, providing fun programs, restoring wildlife habitats, and leading outdoor adventures. Want to connect with nature? Try your hand at archery, bouldering, geocaching, paddling, rappelling, and more. Whether you're seeking experience or a peaceful retreat, our parks are open every day from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset all year round. Come explore, get outside, experience nature. Your parks, your adventures, waiting for you. Find us online at wcparks.org or follow on Instagram, Facebook, or X, or you can call 419-353-1897, the Wood County Park District, preserving nature, creating adventure, and inspiring a greener future. And, of course, our show is also brought to you by our wonderful patrons. These are folks who've gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon, and there they searched for a Green Future, up popped our Patreon page, and they signed up. A little bit comes out of their account every month and comes over to us. And today we want to do a very special thank you. We want to thank all our patrons, of course, but a very special thank you to Jennifer, who made a one-time, very, very generous donation to For a Green Future. So grateful. And if you want to do that, if you're not someone who wants to take a little bit out every month, you can go to patreon.com, sign up to become a patron at whatever number you want for that one donation. Your donation will be immediately deducted, and then you can cancel the subscription. So you don't have to worry about that much coming out every month. So you can also do one-time donations at patreon.com. Okay, Rebecca.
All right.
Your turn at the mic. What do we got?
Okay, well, today I was looking at the list of holidays for July coming up this week just for inspiration, and I was shocked to notice that all the excitement about the 4th of July and Canada Day and whatnot, I had completely forgotten the anniversary of the coronation of King Mindaugas.
Oh, man.
I know.
How could you do that?
I don't even know how that happened. Yeah. So, King Mindaugas, it turns out, today is his coronation anniversary.
This very day.
Yes, is the only Lithuanian king, the only king of Lithuania. Before and after that, I think maybe it had some Grand Dukes. But he was the only guy who was the actual king. And he appears to have been a fairly ruthlessly ambitious guy. Mm-hmm. But one of the things he did, his major accomplishment, besides being a Lithuanian, the only Lithuanian king to ever exist, was that he halted the Tatar advance in the Baltic area. The Tatars being a Turkic tribe of some variety, I believe.
Tartars, yeah.
Tartars, yeah. I keep meaning to find out more about them, actually. But yeah, so I thought I would talk a little bit about the Baltic Sea.
Okay.
It's pretty big, important.
Yeah.
And frankly, I always mix it up with the Black Sea, which is not very smart at all because the Baltic is way, 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 way up north of the Black Sea. So, yeah. The Baltic is a marginal sea or arm of the Atlantic. It's enclosed by the shoreline of Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Russia, Sweden, and northern and central Europe. The northern and central European plains region, which I don't know much about either. And it is the world's largest brackish water basin, which makes it kind of important ecologically. It's fed by a whole bunch of rivers from those various countries, and it flows out through the Danish Straits into the Atlantic.
Right, because brackish means not as salty as the ocean, but definitely some salt in there.
Kind of somewhere between river water and ocean water.
Gotcha.
And I think there's sort of young things that are trying to grow like that a lot, don't they? Mm-hmm. Or maybe that's estuaries. I'm confusing with it. But estuaries are often brackish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of critters like to spawn in the brackish water. Mm-hmm.
So it drains Lithuania and 13 other countries and has lots and lots of islands. So many islands. It's kind of, you can't see the water for the islands just about. And its ecological significance would be that it is a unique environment. There's not that much brackish water anywhere else. So it has high biodiversity, despite not being very saline. It performs a lot of carbon storage and nutrient regulation, and also supports diverse species. So, what is nutrient regulation, you ask? Or at least I did at that point. Maybe you already know, but I had to ask. Nutrient regulation is the processes that control the flow and transformation of nutrients within an ecosystem. So nutrients are constantly being recycled in a good ecosystem. Some of these, there's nutrient uptake, release, storage, and transport, and biogeochemical cycles. Uptake would be, those are the said processes, I guess. So uptake, the process of uptake is consumption by plants and animals of nutrients. Decomposition, there's decomposition by microbes. Storage would be nutrients being stored in soil, sediments, and living biomass, critters which are still alive, which all act as reservoirs for nutrients. And transportation is mostly via water and air. And biogeochemical cycles are cycles of biology, geology, and chemistry, or one or more of the two, which influence nutrient cycles. So that clears up that, hopefully, or gives us somewhere to begin anyway. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, Mindaugas was started life as a Lithuanian polytheist, worshiping Zemina, the earth goddess, who's a version of Semele, possibly. So they think she's related. She's a Greek moon goddess, I think. And Perkunas, the thunder god, among others. But he seems to have gone back and forth about that. He converted to Christianity to make an alliance with somebody. And then I think he got mad at them and deconverted at some point. So, how he felt about you determined a lot about how he felt about your religion, apparently.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I actually had no idea that sea was a brackish sea.
Me neither.
That's interesting.
I didn't know nothing about it.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. All right. Now it's time for ecological news. And we're just going to kind of do some follow-ups on the Kathy Hochul story. The first one.
Here we go.
French and Swiss nukes shut down from heat. This is a story in Euronews back on July 2nd.
Oh, that's useful when everybody wants to have their AC on.
Yeah, exactly. And essentially what's happened both in Switzerland and France is that the cooling water has gotten too hot.
Uh-oh.
And so once your streams or lakes that you're taking the water out of to cool your nuke plant get too hot, A, it doesn't cool anymore, and B, when you discharge the even hotter water back into there, it essentially cooks everything. So you got it, the nearer to boiling you have it when you take it out of the lake, the closer to boiling you're going to have it when you put it back into the lake. And
double plus on good.
Yeah, so it not only doesn't cool, it also kills everything around it.
Oh, yay.
This has happened in Besnauth, Switzerland, where they, at that nuclear plant, they closed one of their plants and they limited the other 50% power. And Switzerland, though, interestingly, is on a course to shut down all their nukes by 2033. So they have some foresight there. And this just kind of, helps you realize when you've made a good decision. It's like, if we had solar and wind in place of this nuke, we wouldn't be shutting stuff down. And then in France, it's the Golfech, Golfech nuke, and the Bougie nuke, and the Blaikus nuke. All three of those shut down because it's too hot. Those poor wimpy...
I think it might be more ratchet than bougie, but never mind.
Yeah. But those poor, wimpy, fragile nuclear plants just can't handle the heat. And so that brings us to our next story. And going back to Governor Hochul, I remember our guest talked about the 2019 law saying that New York State has to reduce their climate. Well, Hochul suggests, according to a story on WGRZ Channel 2, Hochul suggests slowdown on state climate law, focuses on consumer utility rates. So basically they ambushed her outside of this restaurant where she was talking to constituents, And she said, well, you know what? That whole law I'm supposed to follow as governor that we passed way back in 2019. It's like, maybe we're not going to do that after all. She actually is quoted as saying we can't meet those goals. In the meantime, in New York, electricity bills have been going up, literally doubling and tripling. And there's a big, disinformation push to blame it on renewables, saying, we're paying all this money for wind and solar panels. But actually, as in other places, what's happened is that the Public Service Commission of New York Public Service Commission, just approves all the rate increases, whether they're needed or not, and no matter what the excuse for them is. And in fact, they just approved another one for 62% rate increase for New York State Electric and Gas, and no mention of doing this for renewables. And at the same time, New York State Electric and Gas and Rochester Gas and Electric are bragging to their investors, hey, we're making record profits. And yet somehow the news isn't able to connect these things, this idea that you're raising the rates on these are monopolies, remember. They're monopoly utilities, which is the whole reason they're regulated. And the regulators are just throwing the prices open to whatever the utilities want, and somehow they're not making that connection, and they're being like, oh, it's got to be the windmills and solar panels, when actually the windmills and solar panels, every study shows, are much cheaper for electricity. Like in terms of Nuke, it's literally a tenth the cost of electricity. But right now, 37.6% of New York households in 2024 skipped food or medicine in order to pay their energy bill at least 1 month last year, according to some studies that were done. And a lot of people are also blaming the smart meters, but smart meters only add about $100. They're only about $100. That's not the reason. And so again, it's just the unlimited profit, folks. That's why your electric bills are going up. Next story, we're going off to Denmark. And it's kind of a nice story. Denmark extends life of oldest offshore wind. This was on Renew Economy back on July 6th. There's 3 wind farms, very old wind farms, which turns out with proper maintenance, you could run your wind turbines even more than 25 years. The 25 megawatt Samso farm has been approved. The 40 megawatt Middelgrunden wind farm and the 166 megawatt Nysted, all 3 of them have been approved. They were started back in the early 2000s, and they've all been approved to run for another 10 to 20 years based on the fact that they maintained their wind turbines properly, and they're still running great. That's as opposed to Bowling Green, Ohio, which is going to tear down its wind turbines next year. To put these in perspective, wind farms 20 years ago were tiny compared to today's wind farms. The largest wind farm in the world right now is Jagalamar in India. That's 1,600 megawatts as opposed to the Nysted, which was 166 megawatts. So literally 10 times the size. The largest planned wind farm is in Gansu in China, and that is 20,000 megawatts. And it's 20,000 megawatts or 20 gigawatts. Those 10,000 of those are already running. So that plant's already, even though it's not finished, it's already huge. Next story, Electrek. Very important story. July 1st. Hundreds of EPA employees have asked their boss, Lee Zeldin, to stop lying. More than 500 EPA officials signed a declaration of dissent, and it's published on a website called standupforscience.net. So once again, science. Okay, we could know stuff with science, all right? Science is not all just opinions. Anyway, there's 5 points in this declaration of dissent. One is that they say that Lee Zeldin's undermining the public trust in science, clean air regulation, and Lee Zeldin has called environmental regulation religion. And so, again, trying to just totally confuse things. Second point, he's ignoring scientific consensus to benefit polluters. So, basically science says this will kill you, but polluters who make money off of this say, let's say it doesn't. And Lee Zeldin's going along with them.
Not actually true, but let's say it.
Yeah, let's just say that and pretend. Environmental justice is their third point, because a lot of environmental dumping happens on places where people are poor or minorities. Dismantling R&D is point 4, because Lee Zeldin is dismantling the EPA's research department. Because, if you don't actually do the research to find out something's hurting you, how could it be hurting you?
Right.
But the final point is a culture of fear. They're saying he's creating a culture of fear at the EPA so that people can't do their jobs. And that goes right into our next story, which the declaration was July 1st. And then on July 3rd, EPA story, EPA puts on leave 139 employees who spoke out against pollution. So basically, about a third of the people actually signed their names to this. Most of them put their names on, were anonymous supporters because they were afraid they'd get fired. And so what happened is Lee Zeldin has fired them. Well, technically he's put them on 2 weeks paid leave pending an investigation. And he sent out a letter saying, this is not a disciplinary action, but you're fired. It is very interesting because the National Institutes of Health, a lot of the people who work for that institute put out a similar letter, and none of them have gotten fired or are under investigation. But if you protect the environment, they seized upon the excuse to immediately get them out of a job. And let's see, so we're moving right along here. Next story, Canary Media on June 30th. Ohio tax credits budget bill. Will Congress pull plug on Ohio's clean energy momentum? That was the story on June 30th. And now we know the answer because they're talking about the big ugly bill. The answer is yes, because Ohio, the federal government got rid of all the tax credits and all the incentives for having clean energy. For Ohio, that means canceling of $7 billion in planned investment in energy projects that were already in the works or about to start. That's a direct loss of 5,000 people who were hired to put up these wind turbines and solar panels and put on this insulation and help companies get energy efficient. So there were 5,000 people who directly were going to get employed who are now going to get fired. And 17,000 manufacturers, because we have in Ohio, right here in Perrysburg, not far from our studios, the largest solar panel manufacturer in the country. And now those 17,000 additional manufacturing jobs are gone. They will not be hiring people over at First Solar, thanks to Trump and the big ugly bill. And it has been estimated by a think tank called E2, which is a business group, not an environmental group. It's strictly an economic group. But they have estimated that the ripple effect, so, 5,000 people not getting hired, 17,000 manufacturing jobs disappearing, that will create a ripple effect that will cost Ohio 91,000 jobs. And just one quick example of this, Yellow Light out of Cleveland, which is a solar installer, they were prepared to hire 25 additional people to meet the additional demands, but instead they're going to lay off 40% of their workforce. So that's what happens when you have an anti-clean energy administration that is literally breaking laws in order to not build windmills and solar panels. This also will increase our electric bills because with fewer generators, there's going to be fewer plants competing to provide the same amount of electricity, which means the price of electricity will go up. The estimate is that over the next few years, our electric bills will go up an average of $110 here in Ohio. So, and that, of course, puts us way behind China, which is just doing laps around us in terms of clean energy. So we got to balance that with a good news story. Ireland ends coal power generation. Story in PV Magazine on June 20th. Ireland shuts last coal plant, becomes 15th coal-free country in Europe. There's nine countries in Europe that have never had coal power, which is good. But now 6 countries have joined them. Belgium, Austria, this is in order. Belgium was first, followed by Austria, Sweden, Hungary, the UK, and now finally Ireland. They have shut all their coal plants, and the reason they were able to do that is because they've increased their wind and solar. In Ireland's case, wind now provides 37% of all the country's electricity. That's 11 terawatt hours. Solar only provides 1 terawatt hour right now, but it's increasing very rapidly, and in a few years will be a very important energy source for Ireland. So basically what we have is lots of progress all over the world. Countries all over the world are putting up wind and solar at a breakneck pace, which is helping their economies. It's cleaning the environment, and it's providing them with literally homegrown power, because you can't get more local than a solar panel on your own roof providing you with your own power. Here in the U.S., thanks to the Trump administration and their anti-environmental, anti-clean energy policies, we are actually falling behind the rest of the world. We used to be the leader in all this, and now we're dropping steadily in those top 10 lists. This could be one reason that my relative there has started to say, well, we all make mistakes. But we can all fight those mistakes too. We have to all continue to fight for wind, solar, clean energy, because that's the green future, which is what we're hoping for. That's our show. Thanks so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!